Hi, my name's Mark Lynn, and I'm the roommate coach. You're listening to KZZH 96.7 FM in Eureka, California. This will be episode 24 of the Roommate Coach. I'm calling this episode Homesharing. I will explain why in a minute, and just a quick sneak preview. In the very next episode, I am pretty sure I'm going to actually have one of my long-promised interviews. And the interview has a lot to do with the title of the show, which again is Homesharing, episode 24. KZZH 96.7 FM here in Eureka, California, has been brought to the air by Access Humboldt. You can reach them at accesshumboldt.net. And for me, the roommate coach, if you'd like to leave me any feedback, you can do that online at theroommatecoach.com, or you can leave a voicemail anytime, 24/7, at area 707-362-8000. That's 707-362-8000. The motto here on the Roommate Coach is World Peace, one roommate at a time. The home sharing in the title of the show, or that is the title of the show, refers to a program I've spoken about before on the show, a couple times at least. The home sharing idea wherein someone with a home shares some of the space in the home with another person who needs a place to live in return for rent or help around the house or some combination of the two. Frequently, it'll be a senior citizen, older person with a home, sharing the space with a younger person who needs a place to live, although not necessarily. To my understanding, there's not a requirement. That seems to be a fairly frequent situation or frequent way it works out. Well, the interesting thing is it looks like that kind of program is coming to Humboldt County, coming to the local area, which, of course, those who live here know that this is in many ways a fabulous place for this kind of a program. There are plenty of senior citizens here. There are plenty of young people. We have a lot of students, too. Between College of the Redwoods and HSU, there are plenty of college students, in addition to just people in general needing a place to live. I don't want to bore anyone by being repetitious about the housing situation in our world. I think everyone knows that. This area is no exception. So the home sharing provides a great way for people to stay in their homes if it's an older person wanting to stay in their home as they age, and get some help around the house from a younger person who is able to get presumably a nice place to live and a fair rent. So it's one of those win-wins. Now, I've been talking for some time now about interviews. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail this week. I'll reserve that for the interview itself. But the subject of my interview is going to be speaking in some detail about this program. I don't know if it's 100% at this point, but it's looking very promising for this kind of a program to come to Humboldt County and to Eureka. So where does that leave me as the roommate coach? What exactly am I going to do? I've filled in about 3.5 minutes, but my shows generally last about a half hour, so I've got another 26 minutes. Well, as the roommate coach, those of you who've been listening to the show, or if you've gone to my website, you know that I believe there are some fairly simple, straightforward things that can be done to increase the likelihood of roommates continuing to get along with each other and things working out. So here is a perfect example of if the people getting involved in the home sharing situation are able to make things work, it can be a continuing benefit for both. So that's what I'm going to do with this show, is just talk in a little bit of detail about some things that I think can help, maybe some fairly straightforward things. Some of them will probably seem obvious. Some may be things that some people listening haven't thought of before, but in any event, I'm hoping it'll be helpful because I'm really excited about the program, and as you'll find out if you tune in next time for the interview, the people involved in bringing the program here are quite excited as well. Well, first of all, I want to go on record right here as saying that I think the idea of a home sharing program here in Humboldt County is fabulous. My understanding is the program can work really well, and it does in fact work quite well for all kinds of people. And I emphasize this because as the roommate coach, my job is to talk about some of the problems and things that do come up. And unfortunately they do, but I don't want anyone to think that all I am is Mr. Pessimist here, that there are all kinds of roommates of all ages who get along really, really well and are in fact wonderful parts of each other's lives. And so to some extent, I'm almost tempted to say that that's the norm, maybe not 100%, I guess certainly not 100%, but I would like to say that's the default setting. That's kind of the way it should be. And once we get some of the complications out of the way, that's the way I think it will be. And of course, I'm not the only one who thinks this is a good idea. It's probably fair to say that just about anyone getting involved with this kind of a program and signing up for a roommate or a housemate or a home share partner, whatever the term would be, is optimistic about it. I don't think very many people go into a situation with the conscious intention of having it not work very well. So one of the first questions to come up is, well, how come a lot of the time roommate things do go wrong, roommate situations do go wrong? Because we know they do. One of the answers to that, or one of the possible explanations, is something I've heard of as our official position versus our true position. And almost everyone says they want their lives to work, they want things to go well, they want things they're involved with to go as well as possible. So most of us have that position as our official position, but we also have additional positions based on our experiences, based on our background, based on all kinds of things. And unfortunately, sometimes our true position contradicts our official position and, in fact, works against us. I believe this is the kind of thing that helps to explain a lot of the conflict, a lot of the unnecessary conflict that goes on between people and, unfortunately, between roommates. So with that in mind, I think a good starting point would be to try to determine our official position, and to whatever extent it might vary from our true position. The advantage there is by getting in touch with any tendency or any temptation we might have. And when I say we, I mean both sides. I mean everybody involved in the situation. Obviously, it takes two to tango. But whatever tendency someone might have to sabotage themselves to keep things from working as well as possible, well, it's pretty clear that that's the kind of thing that can, in fact, make trouble. And these things are like these concepts, these sabotaging influences. I think they're sort of like mushrooms. They tend to grow in the dark. So the trick is to put a little bit of light on them and get them out in the open and take a closer look at them. I think they're a little more likely to be dealt with and to maybe to lose some of their power to cause trouble when they're brought out into the open. So that's a good starting point, and it requires some introspection, some self-analysis. But embarking on an adventure like this, getting involved in a fairly significant program like having a roommate or sharing your home, whichever side of the fence you happen to be on, it's probably a good time to do things like that, to do some soul searching and take a real close look at your genuine motivations and what you're willing to do and how far you're willing to go and so on and so forth. Closely related to the self-sabotaging tendencies that I think a lot of us have them to some extent or another, although most of the time we keep them in check, fortunately. There's also the fact that for many of us, conflict is familiar. Now, we might say that we want peace and quiet and calm and tranquility in our home lives, and I believe we do. I think most of us do. But there's also a really strong tendency to duplicate that which we're familiar with, even if we don't especially like it. It's a little bit harder emotionally and psychologically to create something different. So that's another thing to watch out for, another influence, I guess influence is the right word, the kind of thing that can get in the way and keep something like this kind of a program from working as well as it could for anyone involved. I realize that in our society, we're kind of encouraged to put on a happy face and pretty much just ignore things that might in fact be negative. But I think in this case, it really is a good idea to be as honest as possible with ourselves and each other about whatever negative tendencies we might have, because let's face it, a lot of these situations do wind up being difficult and sometimes not working at all. So there has to be something involved making them go wrong. So it's a good time for, like I say, some real soul searching. I would take this even a step farther. I think a really good thing to consider for any two people who are embarking on a new adventure like this, and I think adventure is a good way to look at it. I think early on, maybe even before the deal is made, before the arrangement is finalized, but at least early in the relationship, I think it's a good idea for two people to sit down and have a very important, lighthearted but serious discussion about things that each of them thinks they might do inadvertently to keep the thing from working. Again, I know this might sound counterintuitive and maybe even overly pessimistic, but I don't think there's any harm done if it turns out that none of the things materialize, none of the negative things materialize. Then, well, that's fine. Then you're just getting along great and all is well. But if something does happen to come up, the neat thing about discussing this kind of thing in advance is, well, then maybe you're a little bit prepared for it, and then it's a little bit more likely that you'll be able to talk about it with some goodwill and some friendliness because it's already a familiar topic. Just as an example of how you might approach this kind of a thing, I worked with a therapist a number of years ago, Nathaniel Brandon, who used a technique he referred to as the sentence completion, which he used it really, really effectively, and I think it might work here in a situation like this if you're talking to each other about possible ways that either of you might sabotage the relationship. And again, with some goodwill and maybe even some humor, you could say things like, one of the ways I might screw this up is, and then you would repeat that's a sentence stem, you would repeat that and then fill it in with whatever endings come up. And with a phrase like that, with a little bit of lightheartedness to it, it might be a little more likely that you'll be able to have this kind of a conversation and maintain the goodwill. The goodwill and the human connection is the most crucial thing of all. If you can maintain that, then there's a good chance that you can deal with almost anything that comes up. You're listening to The Roommate Coach on KZZH 96.7 FM in Eureka, California. My name is Mark Lynn, and this is episode 24 of The Roommate Coach. The title of this episode is Homesharing. I'm talking about a new program that's hopefully coming to Humboldt County in the fairly near future, a homesharing program. And in this episode, I'm discussing some of the possible ways that people that are involved or would like to be involved might be able to increase the chances of having it work out really well. If you'd like to leave any feedback for me, the Roommate Coach, you can do that at the website, theroommatecoach.com. There is a contact link on the homepage. You could also leave a voicemail anytime, 24/7, at 707-362-8000. That's 707-362-8000. I always like to mention that KZZH has been brought to the air here in Humboldt County by Access Humboldt. You can reach them at accesshumboldt.net. And of course, the motto here on the Roommate Coach is world peace, one roommate at a time. Just a quick recap of the positive things. I don't say a whole lot about the things that we need to do because I think we all kind of intuitively know them, and the problem is that we don't do them. But just for the sake of completeness, there's three big categories. There's consideration, communication, and integrity. They're pretty self-explanatory. I've spoken at more length in other places and definitely on the website on theroommatecoach.com. But consideration, and it doesn't mean you have to bend over backwards or be a doormat or just do everything the other person says. It's not that at all. It's just a matter of realizing that what you do affects other people and acting accordingly, just keeping their interests in mind as well as your own. Communication is an offshoot of consideration. It just means letting each other know when things are happening. If you've got something planned that affects the other person, let them know. If your plans change, you let them know. And integrity is pretty obvious. Everything from the rent, the expenses, dealing with each other's stuff, just being honest, just doing everything that you say you will, as the old, I think it was the Texas Rangers used to say. I mention these primarily for completeness because, as I say, I think most of us know that. Now, here is a kind of a fundamental type topic that I think can help a lot in terms of getting along and making the roommate relationship work. We have a tendency in our society to be real concerned with what the other person is doing and try to figure out ways to get the other person to do what we want them to and to quit doing what we don't want them to. So I'm going to suggest changing the focus as much as possible, since there's really no easy way to directly control another person. Mankind has been trying that for thousands of years with continually disappointing results, to put it mildly. So put the focus on yourself. Now, here's a kind of a cute phrase, a little cute saying, but it's got a lot of truth to it. The way to have a great roommate is to be a great roommate. So here's my prescription for that. Just do whatever you can, including the previously mentioned soul searching. Do whatever you can to turn yourself into the very best roommate anyone could possibly want. Now, anyone who's been involved in real estate knows about buyer's markets and seller's markets. Well, if you're selling the property, you want a seller's market. So the analogy here is by becoming a really good roommate, becoming a rarely good roommate, you're cutting way down on the competition and you're giving yourself a lot of bargaining power. I'd go so far as to say, if you're willing to talk to your close friends and family, anyone that you trust, and ask them for some honest feedback. Ask them for if they'll share with you anything that they think maybe you could improve. If there's something that, depending on how well they know you, if they've lived with you, for example, then they're really in a position. Now, this brings up another whole topic that could be and probably will be a show in itself, which is constructive criticism. That's another thing about our culture that I think kind of gets in the way of our ability to get along with each other, is we have a tendency to not want to hear anything remotely negative about ourselves. which is understandable. It's not pleasant. And, of course, in some cases, we have a history of having that be overdone, so that explains the sensitivity. But the trouble is, if you filter out anything negative, then you're missing an important part of the story. And if there are things that you could in fact do, and in some cases they might be fairly simple if you just knew about them, if there are things that you could do that would make your bargaining position stronger by being a really exceptionally popular, in-demand type roommate, well, it's good to know about them. Another saying I like is, the truth can never be your enemy. So that's all in the category of just doing whatever you can to become a really, really good roommate. And then the rest of that formula is, once you have this bargaining power, you need to be willing to use it. You just need to make your position clear that, okay, look, I've done what it takes to become a really good, considerate, respectful, and honest roommate. And speaking to your potential roommate, either literally or figuratively, you'll say, I've become the kind of roommate that everybody wants, and you probably want. I'll be a really good deal for you. Now, the catch is, you need to do the same. So you say this to people you deal with, and whether you say it out loud or whether you just project it in your mannerisms, the point is that you know it. You know that you're a darn good deal, and you insist on that in return. You kind of draw your line in the dirt, as it were. You're listening to The Roommate Coach. This is episode 24, calling it Homesharing. And you're listening on KZZH 96.7 FM in Eureka, California. KZZH is brought to the air here in Eureka by Access Humboldt. They can be reached at accesshumboldt.net. My name is Mark Lynn. I'm the Roommate Coach. If you'd like to leave feedback for me, you can do that online at theroommatecoach.com. There's a contact link on the homepage. You can also leave voicemail at area 707-362-8000. The bumper music here on The Roommate Coach is called Rollin' at 5, and that's by Kevin MacLeod. And I always like to mention, whenever I remember, that the motto here on The Roommate Coach is World Peace, one roommate at a time. Today we're talking about the Homesharing program that is expected to be starting up here in Humboldt County fairly soon, and that's going to be the subject of the next episode, and hopefully, or at least what's planned, is what I think will be a very interesting interview on the topic. So with the Homesharing idea in mind, I'm going through a few things today, just kind of reminders of ways to basically increase the likelihood of the roommate, of the sharing of the home working out. With different personalities and everything, sometimes things don't work as well as we'd like between people. And I think I've got just enough time left in today's show to touch on a very important aspect of all this, which is the fact that sooner or later things do happen and there are disagreements, and even people of goodwill can want different things. So a real important question for any people, especially people living together, is what's the best way to deal with conflicts that come up? The idea being to hopefully maintain the goodwill. That's most important of all. Maintain the human connection and come up with solutions that work for everybody. And accomplish all this without making things worse, without turning a disagreement or a difference of opinion into a battle or a full-scale war. Now, there is a secret to this, maybe not really a secret, but a relatively simple principle that is all too easy to overlook, but all you have to do to minimize the chances of turning things into worse problems than they are is to avoid attacking each other, and avoid making up all kinds of guesses about the other person's motivations. Pretty much talk about yourself, talk about your own needs, about what you need to happen and why you need it, and keep it relatively neutral. I've mentioned before on the show that one of a number of people whose principles I believe in and try to follow in my own recommendations is Marshall Rosenberg, the recently late Marshall Rosenberg, I should say, who created nonviolent communication. There's a book of that name, and I'd like to quote just briefly from his chapter on conflict resolution. Again, this is from the book. Title of it is Nonviolent Communication, 3rd edition by Marshall Rosenberg. And it's the chapter toward the end of the book on conflict resolution and mediation. He's talking about the traditional goal of conflict resolution, which frequently seems to be getting the other person to do what we want, as opposed to what he recommends, which is concentrating on what we need and what everybody needs and trying to figure out how to get everybody's needs met. So with that in mind, here's what he says, and I quote, "When we see the difference between these two objectives, we consciously refrain from trying to get a person to do what we want. Instead, we work to create that quality of mutual concern and respect where each party thinks their own needs matter and they are conscious that their needs and the other person's well-being are interdependent. When that happens, it's amazing how conflicts that otherwise seem irresolvable are easily resolved." End quote. Now, just in passing, Marshall Rosenberg is the man who has led seminars among, for example, Palestinians and Israelis who at the beginning of the seminar were literally ready to murder each other, and by the end of the seminar, in a couple of cases, they were inviting each other to their homes for dinner. So his techniques do work, and that's the main reason why I'm such a big fan of them and why I'm advocating similar things here. They work. The importance of establishing and maintaining the goodwill and the connection when you're disagreeing or when there is a conflict or when feelings start to get a little hurt, whatever. It's so important that I would say that probably one of the most important things you can do at the beginning of the roommate situation, or of any relationship for that matter, is to figure out whatever you can do to establish this goodwill and this human connection. I mean, we are all in it together. And the neat thing about having that connection established is almost anything that comes up can be dealt with if both parties genuinely want to. I mean, some of these things are so simple that it's almost embarrassing that sometimes conflicts remain conflicts simply because one or both of the parties involved just aren't willing to budge, aren't willing to give an inch. I'm tempted to say that one could take a look at international politics for examples of that, but I don't want to veer off into a political rant. But especially when there's conflict, when there's differences, when you need something to change rather than attacking the other person, criticizing the other person, the principle to try to follow is to just talk about the issue itself and talk about what you need and why you need it. And the nice thing about that is things can still go wrong. There's nothing is guaranteed, and none of these suggestions are guaranteed to make magical changes. I mean, we live in the real world, but it's a matter of increasing the percentages and ramping up the batting average. So this kind of approach definitely increases the likelihood of being able to come up with solutions that work well for everyone without making the situation worse. So those are some of the things that can be done to help any roommate situation. The home sharing situation we're talking about that hopefully is coming to Humboldt County frequently involves people of different generations. Another term for it is multi-generational. That's an aspect I didn't even get a chance to comment on in this go-round, but maybe next time. But this is probably one of those topics that can lend itself to a number of episodes. So I hope you found this useful. I'm really looking forward to the next episode and the interview where hopefully we'll go into more detail about this home sharing program. But I guess it's time to wrap this episode up. So once again, this is the Roommate Coach. This has been episode 24, talking about home sharing and announcing the interview for the next episode. And this is KZZH 96.7 FM here in Eureka, California, brought to the air by Access Humboldt. You can reach them at accesshumboldt.net. And if you'd like to leave feedback for me, I'm Mark Lynn. I'm the Roommate Coach. And my website is theroommatecoach.com. There is a contact link on the homepage. You could leave feedback there. You could also leave voicemail at area 707-362-8000. 707-362-8000. And that's about it. Oh yeah, the motto. I think it's especially important in these troubled times. The Roommate Coach, the motto is world peace, one roommate at a time. I think that's a real good thing to hope for, and I've enjoyed talking to you. I hope you find this helpful and look forward to talking to you again real soon. Thanks a lot for listening.